Okay, hi everyone. So we all know Peter Thiel has always been a provocative thinker. In fact, he wrote his first opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal 20 years ago, attacking higher education, so no real change there. And the headline was "A Model for Silliness." And I think Peter's life has really shown that he's carried on in that vein as a contrarian, kind of provocative thinker. He's had about 5 different careers before he was sort of 35, from running a hedge fund and PayPal. He's against death, higher education, and government. But he's in favor of something, which is U2 and Bono. So I know we're going to get to that later. So I'd just like to start with, obviously, your book, 0 to 1, and about the concept of creative monopolies. So tell me, do you think Google is still a creative monopoly?
Well, so yes, the thesis in my book, 0 to 1, is that if you're a founder or an entrepreneur, you always want to aim for monopoly. And that's the goal you should have in starting any business. Successful businesses are monopolies, unsuccessful ones are restaurants that have too much competition. From the point of view of society, obviously the questions are a little bit different, and we always have this question: when are monopolies good? When are they bad? I would certainly still put Google on the good side. I think Google is continuing to invest a lot in developing new technologies. And then I think even when you get to a bad monopoly, something like Comcast may be a bad monopoly, you have to then get to the question, will our government be able to regulate it better? And the history of government intervention has been tricky. You know, they stopped IBM in the late 70s, just at the point when everything was moving from hardware to software. They stopped Microsoft in the 90s, just as things were moving to the internet. So even when there are bad monopolies in technology, we perhaps shouldn't worry about them that much, because technology will change over time.
What about Amazon? Is Amazon a creative monopoly?
Well, Amazon is it certainly is a monopoly. It's a natural monopoly. It has enormous economies of scale. People in the media and the publishing industry tend to not like it, so I think there's a very powerful anti-Amazon narrative that gets told. But it has certainly made, from the consumer perspective, it's made books far cheaper, far more available. So it's been a good monopoly, I think, in every sense of the word.
All right. So I want to talk a bit about social media. Obviously, we're the first investor in Facebook, but you've also said that Twitter is a nice company, but doesn't take civilization to the next level. So does any social media company really take civilization to the next level?
Well, it's again, I want to always be careful in my context here. So, you know, our tagline of the Founders Fund website is, they promised us flying cars, all we got was 140 characters. But this is not a critique of Twitter as a company. I think it's a very successful company. I think the 2,000 people who work there will be gainfully employed for decades to come. But it's clear that on its own, this is not enough to take our civilization to the next level. And it's unfair to blame the leadership of Twitter and say, well, you should have done something else. The fault is really among all of us. We should be doing more than just companies like that.
So I know you're trying to look to the future, and obviously you're making some really interesting big bets right now. And I want to talk a bit about big ideas like artificial intelligence and longevity research. So perhaps we can just start on the latter about, do you really think you can live forever?
Well, I think we can be doing a lot more on the fight against aging. It's probably the single thing that people do the least on in our society. It's a problem that I think could be slowed. We could figure out what causes it, how to reverse it. Almost every disease in the world is linked to aging. You know, you have a 1 in 1,000 chance of getting cancer in your next year at age 30. You have a 1 in 10 chance at age 80 in getting cancer in your next year of life. And almost everything is like that. It's linked to aging. I think that it's very underexplored for these deep psychological reasons, and the dominant modes we have of dealing with mortality and death are a schizophrenic combination of acceptance and denial. Acceptance, it's going to happen. Extreme pessimism, can't do anything about it. Denial, it's not going to happen for a long time, don't need to worry about it. And what this combination of extreme optimism and extreme pessimism have in common is that they tell you there's no point in doing something, there's no need to do something, therefore you do nothing. And so I think a healthier attitude is an intermediate one. I don't know if I will succeed or not, but I think we should spend more time fighting and less time in the acceptance denial mode.
So how long would you say right now you think you're going to live for?
Oh, I don't think the future is something that exists or is set. I'm not a prophet. I can't tell you how long I'm going to live or what the future is going to look like. What I think what we do have choices over are things we can do. And so I think we should always replace questions about the future with questions about human agency. And so I think we can be spending, I can spend time as an investor, I can, as an advisor to companies that are working in this area, I can talk about it, and those are the kinds of things we should be focusing on.
Okay, so artificial intelligence, obviously a huge subject for many in the room. You're a big backer of Elon Musk, who has said recently that AI is potentially more dangerous than nukes. Where do you come out on the kind of dangers of AI?
It's certainly I agree with Elon that I think our intuitions about it are very misplaced, and we often talk about artificial intelligence in economic terms. Will it take people's jobs? What does it mean for the economy? Whereas I think if you actually built a strong AI that was smarter than humans in every dimension, this would be the equivalent of extraterrestrials landing on this planet. And if aliens landed on this planet tomorrow, the first question would not be, what does it mean for the economy? The first question would be political. Are they friendly? Are they unfriendly? And I think the political question about AI is a very important one. And I think our intuitions about that are very underdeveloped. Now, that being said, I still think it's very far in the future. I would sort of, my guess would be that it's maybe a century or more away. So even though I think it's a very important question, it's one I don't worry about that much.
Okay. Another futuristic subject, which obviously you're engaged with, is space and space travel, not least the the flying car. So I guess when are we going to see the flying car?
Well, certainly it's technologically possible. There are all sorts of I actually get given the tagline on our website, I get pitched by flying car companies once or twice a year, and there's sort of people working on this in all sorts of places.
Have you invested in any flying car companies?
We have not yet invested in any of them. The main challenges are not technological but political. It's seen as too dangerous, too noisy, too risky, and we live in a world in which the world of bits of computers is relatively unregulated. The world of atoms is heavily regulated, and so the challenges with something like a flying car are more political than technological.
So we obviously saw the crash last week, unfortunately, of Virgin Galactic. How do you sort of look at that kind of as a problem for the future of actually humans going into space?
Well, it's certainly, I don't want to minimize the tragedy at all, and whenever these things happen, it's whenever you have the loss of human life, it's always a tragedy. I would certainly echo Branson's sentiment that you don't want to let this stop us, and that we should keep going. I do think that there's always sort of an enormously negative narrative that gets cast around this, and we are always scared of technology. One of my contrarian beliefs is that we are not actually living in a scientific or technological age, and those of us who are working in science and technology are the counterculture in our society today. If you want to see what the dominant culture thinks of science or technology, you should just watch the science fiction movies that come out of Hollywood, and they all portray technology that doesn't work, that kills people, that's dystopian, that destroys the world, and the future is some combination of the Terminator, the Matrix, Avatar, Elysium, the list goes on and on. I watched the Gravity movie the other day. You would never want to go into outer space. You'd want to be back on some muddy island, and so when you have something happen like what happened with the Virgin Galactic, it always gets interpreted against this broader cultural backdrop of deep pessimism and deep hostility to all things technological.
So we were talking off stage about the battle between Silicon Valley. Everyone wants to change the world, and in some ways there's a real arrogance in why Silicon Valley thinks it has the technology to solve problems. And I wonder if you could just engage with that a bit about why you said before that Washington, D.C. is dominated by law and process, Silicon Valley by engineers and substance, which is a pretty, strong statement. But, what about the role of the, people who aren't in the Silicon Valley, and do you really have the right, as, the technologists, to determine and say we're going to change the world?
Well, these questions of rights are always very tricky. You can always flip it around and say, what gives the people in D.C. the right to stop medical inventions that could save many people's lives, or what gives people the right to stop technology in one form or another. I do think there's this enormous gulf that separates the two, which is why they communicate quite poorly. Questions of science and technology are not high priorities in politics. I did a count of this. There are 535 senators and congressmen in DC. By a generous count, 35 of them have a background in science, engineering, technology of any sort. The rest of them do not understand that windmills don't work when the wind isn't blowing, or solar panels don't work at night, and they're basically still living in the Middle Ages in one way or another. And so I think you have this enormous gulf that is to be crossed. But I think I do think the part of the premise people in Silicon Valley and elsewhere I think would question is that it's not as though we're living in a perfect world. We're living in a world in which there are enormous problems. There are many things that are incredibly screwed up, and so I think it is imperative on us to try to fix these problems as quickly as possible. And sometimes that means not asking for permission, but really asking for forgiveness later.
So give me an example of that.
Well, I think it's almost all the it's all the cutting-edge technology companies do this in one way or another. When we started PayPal, there was a question about how this intersected with all the complicated financial rules. Strictly speaking, there were no financial rules for PayPal because it was a new form of money transfer, a new sort of payment system, and then there was sort of this complicated question: did we have to get it within some existing regulatory framework or not? And to some extent, we just rolled out the service and then figured out the regulatory stuff later on. I think there are companies that have pushed the envelope too far. So I think Napster, as a music company, is sort of the poster child for being too disruptive. You nap some music, you nap a kid. It's sort of a bad name for a company. But I think that's always the challenge.
So obviously you're now a venture capitalist. How often do you ever come across new big ideas? Are there any big ideas out there?
Well, I think there are a decent number of big ideas. It's always the combination of big ideas with a team that's going to be able to execute against them, turn them into a good business, and actually see them realized. So it's always a combination of the ideas, the technology, the business ability, and then the team of people. Will they be able to work together, or will they just, will things fall apart because of internal personal conflicts?
So ahead of this, about 2 weeks ago, you spoke to the Financial Times, and you weren't that polite about Europe. In fact, you said Europe is a slacker with low expectations. There we go. Held back by a poor work ethic and run by politicians that strangle technological progress. You said London was okay, but they work less hard in Berlin. So I wonder if you can just sort of talk a bit about how you actually see Europe, and obviously you've got 22,000 people come to the Web Summit in Dublin. How does that make you change your perception of the European scene?
Well, again, this is obviously not representative of Europe at all. Let's start with that as a starting point. I do think that there's always, I was born in Germany, my parents moved to the States when I was a year old, and so there's always this interesting question: how would my life have turned out differently had I grown up in Germany rather than California? And I think California is extremely optimistic, it's a little bit desperate. I always think of Germany as sort of extremely pessimistic and somewhat too comfortable. And I think that, I do think there's something about the pessimism that permeates continental Europe that is very demotivating. If you have low expectations, they're likely to be met, but you're likely not to try all that hard either. And I think that permeates things in very powerful ways. But I think the tech industry is sort of the big exception, because it is the one area where we are seeing progress. We have an example of things working. We have an example of things changing, of people succeeding in extraordinary ways in fairly short periods of time. And so it is sort of the big counterexample to this pessimistic narrative that dominates so much of our culture.
But do you look at this 22,000 people and think, actually, it means Europe's either loads of stuff is happening or in another bubble?
I often get asked this bubble question. I don't think we're, I lived through the late 90s bubble in Silicon Valley. I don't think we have anything close to that in terms of levels of insanity. I think these bubbles are psychosocial phenomena. The public is not involved in the tech world, at least as investors. The IPOs are far too late in the process. There were 300 plus IPOs in the late 90s. Today there may be 30 or 40 tech IPOs a year. And so my own sense is also more generally that this is going to go on for a very long time. It's there are certainly parts that are frothy, but I think I think if you in the U.S. context, Silicon Valley has become the magnet for talented young people, and I think it will remain that for decades to come.
I want to go back to the sort of European issue a bit. So this week we had the head of GCHQ, the intelligence agency, basically taking on big US tech companies and almost essentially saying they had become the agency for helping ISIS and calling them the routes for the facilitation of crime and terrorism. So what do you think tech companies should do about this sort of, when government comes to them and says, we need to access your data? How do you handle that kind of debate?
Well, there certainly is always this complicated question of security versus privacy. But my own sense is that if anything, the trend in Silicon Valley at this point is very much in the other direction. It's towards more privacy. And there is a sense at a number of the larger tech companies that they've been too much in bed with the government. This was certainly one of the things that came out with the Snowden revelations, that there was a disturbing amount of data that was going to the governments that had actually nothing to do with ISIS or any of these terrorist groups, and that was just all sorts of personal information about people that was really quite irrelevant if one thought about it. So I think if you think about the future of the computer age, there's always a question: does computer technology lead to more transparency and security, or to more privacy and more anarchy? The 1960s, people thought the future of the computer age was going to be these centralized databases that control the whole world. You had sort of one of the early Star Trek movie episodes had the planet Beta, where there was this computer that had been built 8,000 years earlier. It ran the whole planet. As usual, they followed the Prime Directive and blew up the computer on that episode. And then by the 90s, people thought that computers would decentralize things and lead to sort of this more fragmented world with lots of privacy. The information would be contained on home computers and would be secure in all these ways. And from 1999 to 2014, the pendulum in a way has swung back all the way to the 60s, where we think of the computer age as being centralized databases that know everything. And if I had to make a judgment, I think we're starting to see the pendulum swing back the other way. Snapchat had an opening because there was a sense that some of the other social networking companies were not respecting users' privacy enough. There's the Bitcoin phenomenon on the monetary side. And I think there's sort of a number of other things like this that one could point to as indicators that it's going very much the opposite way, and that's the way I would interpret that editorial.
But aren't you benefiting from some of these debates because of Palantir and what you're doing for the government?
Well, I think Palantir is a company that sells software to help analyze a lot of these databases. I think the core challenge in all these national security contexts is, can we find technological solutions? And I always define technology as doing more with less. And so in the context of national security, it means, can technology get us more security with less privacy invasion? Obviously, there are all sorts of non-technological ways the debate gets set up, where it gets set up between the GCHQ people and the civil libertarians who believe that you should just, it's always a trade-off. And I think we should always look at, are there technological answers where we're smarter about it and we can figure out there's just a small subset of the data we need, and then you have both more security and more privacy. The trend in some ways over the last decade has been the other way around. This is what I think, I think the NSA revelations show something that looks more like the Keystone Cops than Big Brother. And it basically shows this agency that's sort of hoovering up all this data from all over the world and has absolutely no clue what to do with it. I don't think Obama should have listened to Merkel's cell phone. I don't think he knew he was listening to Merkel's cell phone. And so I think there is sort of a paradigm where you can have both. There's an opposite paradigm where you can have both more security and more privacy.
Talking maybe a sort of subject closer to home, Obviously, Tim Cook at Apple has just come out very openly in a very interesting statement about being gay and Christian. What kind of impact do you think that will have? And do you think, what do you think about his move?
I think that I think it's always a good thing for gay people to come out, and I think this is one of the main ways the culture has changed in recent decades is by people sort of identifying themselves as gay. I think it was a very courageous move on Tim Cook's part, because while I think within Silicon Valley it's a very tolerant place and it's not that controversial, I think if you're the CEO of a major tech company, there's always a way in which you personify the brand on a global level, and there definitely are parts of the world where people think about this issue very differently from other parts. It's very courageous given that Apple's operating in this global context.
Now, I know we're running out of time, but okay, what is the worst thing about being a billionaire?
It's sort of like there's like I don't get any sympathy for any answer I'd give to that question, I think.
Well, I think the room wants to know, though.
There's always I think money is always this incredibly mysterious thing. When I was doing pitches for PayPal back in '99, I would hold up a $100 bill in front of an audience of investors, and if you just hold up money in front of people, it has a hypnotic effect, and so there is something about it that's it gets people's attention, and you have these questions: why is it valuable? It has no use value. You wouldn't use it as wallpaper. You wouldn't use it. It's not very hygienic even, and then it's just sort of this thing that everybody wants, and you end up with this context where most people feel they have far too little money, and then when you don't have too little, it changes all the relations with people in very strange ways.
So how do you avoid sycophants?
You try to surround you try to maintain friendships from the time before you were wealthy. So I think that ends up being very important. You try to surround yourself with people where that's not the case, and that's always a challenge. I mean, you can avoid it by just becoming a recluse too. I mean, so there are different ways to do it.
Becoming more reckless.
The Howard Hughes model.
So
I don't like that model, but
you're not going to go down that route then?
Not planning on it.
I'm afraid Peter Thiel has to, unfortunately, take his flying car early. So he's going to be doing a book signing at the front immediately after this. So if anyone wants to come and say hi and grab him very quickly, he's going to be there. And I just want to join the audience in thanking Peter Thiel for his great, expansive remarks.
Thank you.